Well, thank you. Yeah, thanks very much for giving me this opportunity. We've got 9 days to go, feeling great. We're getting great feedback from our candidates all across the country, and I believe the ballot question is shaping up into who Canadians trust to make life more affordable, to leave more money in their pockets so they can get ahead. We know that more and more families are saying that they find difficulty getting to the end of the month, paying all their bills, working very hard, but often not having money left over. So our entire platform is all centered around making life more affordable, lowering taxes so that Canadians can get ahead. And we're very optimistic, very confident for the results on October 21st.
We want to dive into the substance of the platform, but before that, just an overall question. Why did you wait to release the platform until the first day of advanced voting and after all of the leaders' debates?
Well, it was always the plan to spend the bulk of the vast majority of the campaign making announcements one at a time so that we had the ability to drive home a message on each of the individual announcements we were making. And quite frankly, we had so many to make that we just identified that day. We thought it was appropriate to do it before, while advanced poll, right at the beginning of advanced polls, so that people could vote having it at their available to them. But we had so many positive announcements to make. We wanted each one to, as much as possible, stand on its own. Even then, we still had to make some announcements where we're bundling several together, and we were just trying to avoid having too many of those.
Can you talk a bit about the infrastructure in particular, which is what you announced previously when you were here? You specifically announced the George Massey Tunnel replacement. But in your budget, you're talking about now moving it out by 6 years. You're not cutting it, you're moving it out. It is 6 years, I think.
Well, we're going from 12 to 15.
Right.
Yeah.
Sorry, 3 years. Mm-hmm. So can you tell me, though, what happens for a place like Metro Vancouver, where we have, I printed out this morning the 10-year vision, which is, there's so much that needs to be done in cities like Vancouver. So much needs to be done in Toronto, Montreal, and so on. How are regions supposed to pay for it if they're not going to get help from the federal government?
Well, the message is that they will continue to get help. We are going to spend the exact same amount in total over a more responsible time frame. This is in context, though, with what's happening in reality with the Liberal infrastructure plan. The parliamentary budget officer said that it doesn't exist, and that most years they're lapsing up to 40% of what was originally allocated. So our commitment is that all projects that have already been agreed to, that have already been signed off on and greenlit and started, we will honor. We have also identified some high priority ones from our perspective: the Massey Tunnel here, the Yonge and Ontario lines in Toronto, the third link in Quebec City. And we're going to continue to do the types of things Conservatives always did, like when we made the gas tax permanent. And in many situations, the municipalities, their normal plans will continue to be able to be met because the overall envelope is going to be the same.
We hear again and again, though, from the BC business community that the Pacific Gateway, as Vancouver is known, really doesn't get the recognition it deserves, and that infrastructure is falling significantly behind, and that any curtailment in spending is going to only delay airport expansion, port expansion, rail expansion, all things that are vital to the national economy and the BC economy. So what do you say about those folks?
We actually have good news for people at the ports and at the airports, because we are going to ensure that the dollars that are allocated through infrastructure actually goes to infrastructure that creates economic activity. The Liberals have added a lot of different types of things that traditionally have not been considered infrastructure hard assets, like ports and airports. We're going to precisely focus on that. I remember the previous Conservative government had a very successful Asian Pacific Gateway Fund that helped with logistics, not just at the ports, but as far away as inland terminals in Regina, which really helped facilitate goods moving through the port. I've been able to tour through the port twice now in my time as Leader of the Opposition. We've heard concerns about how things like Bill C-69 will be applied to projects that were contemplated and the work done on the front end, but now if they will have to go through this new process that is designed really to not allow big projects to proceed. So we've got great news for the ports. We're going to be there. We believe in that. That is their economic engines. We will absolutely ensure that they have the funds necessary and the regulatory framework that they need to develop and enhance their operations.
Mr. Scheer, do you know on these projects that are green lit, two major transit projects that are important to British Columbia, an extension of the subway Broadway line, and then there's also a light rapid transit project in Surrey. Do you know if they're on that list of projects that would be approved and the government would continue to fund those? Because I think under the Trudeau government they had pledged $1.4 billion or something of those two projects.
Well, our commitment is that anything that has been formally agreed upon will proceed. And we do know that the Liberals, in the dying days of this government just before the election, were making press releases and making announcements without actually having formally signed off on. But people can have confidence that anything that is designed to reduce commute times, anything that's designed to enhance public transit, to move people to and from work more quickly, that is exactly what we will be prioritizing. We are going to ensure that those projects get built to help reduce commute times and improve the quality of living for people in our cities.
Do you think there should be a priority, though, put on things like transit as opposed to cars? Because obviously climate change has been is one of the key issues for people. So should there be a priority on those kinds of projects, particularly in cities? Obviously in the rural areas they're not going to have SkyTrains. But is that part of your plan?
We have a balanced approach, and I think that's the key. Recognizing that investments in public transit and making sure that people can spend less time idling their cars and less time in traffic, a balanced approach is what is required. It helps with new developments for housing as well, when people can know if they buy a home a little bit further away, but there's a good access to public transit or a road that will take them where they need to go quickly. So I would describe our plan as being balanced. It will have significant funds for public transit. I grew up in Ottawa taking the bus everywhere I went. Our family didn't own a car. I believe in public transit, and I believe it's very important. And people can have confidence knowing that the federal government will be there for that. We will also help reduce commute times for motorists as well. And the Massey Tunnel is a good example of that. I was in Richmond the day that we made the announcement, and I spoke to our people who are volunteering on our local candidate, and they were saying people start lining up sometimes 3 o'clock in the afternoon or earlier to get through that. So that's a quality of life issue. People idling their cars, it's not good for the environment. So we will have a balanced approach.
Speaking of the environment, can you talk a little bit about your climate plan? Because I know you're emphasizing innovation, and a lot of larger companies, LNG in particular, are already innovating. So is that's the cornerstone? What more can you tell us about this?
Sure, and thanks for the opportunity to do that. Yes, innovation will be a big part of that. What the government is doing right now for the companies that were not successful in getting a massive exemption from the carbon tax, they will be paying a tax to the government, and the government decides on how to spend it. What we're saying is for large emitters that they will pay into a fund, an innovation fund, that will be flexible in nature but focused in purpose, and that is that it must lead to the types of research and innovation that reduce emissions and reduce energy consumption. So that could be partnering with an industry association that is funding research and development. It could be partnering with the university, and it won't be going to government revenue. So it's quite different from the Liberals on that front. We're also going to bring in a green patent tax credit, which has been proven to be successful at the provincial level. There's an example in Saskatchewan of a company called Morris Industries, I believe, or Morris Fuels, and they developed a new way of recycling heat within a refinery, and they now can produce the same volume of refined product at significantly lower emission. They took advantage of a provincial tax credit to incentivize doing that. So with a federal tax credit, we see Canada and Canadian companies being a magnet for investment dollars to do that type of research and development here. Another key component of our climate change plan is taking the climate change fight global. And this is the piece that the Liberals and NDP miss completely. We could shut everything down tomorrow morning. Everybody could turn off their cars, shut off their furnaces. Every factory could tools down and go home. And within a matter of days, China, Indonesia, and India would replace everything that we were doing here. So we're not doing the world any favors if we're just chasing away jobs and investment, seeing factories pop up in other countries, emitting higher levels of CO2 because they don't have access to the same type of technology or hydroelectricity. So we're going to recognize that, for example, with aluminum, we can make more aluminum here, and for every unit that we make in Canada and not in one of those countries that don't have access to clean electrical power, we're actually emitting fewer emissions. That's better for the planet. So taking the climate change fight global, exporting clean Canadian technology, facilitating the adoption of things like carbon capture, that is actually going to have a more positive effect on lowering emissions.
So
Isn't the point of the Paris Agreement, wasn't the point of it that countries like China and emerging economies, that the only way that they would sign on is if the big emitters signed on to it, and if the developed world made a commitment that they would also reduce their emissions. So how do you square that with saying, oh, well, we won't cut our emissions because you guys need to cut, and that is in fact the basis of that international agreement?
Well, two things there. First of all, our plan will lead to significant emissions reductions here at home. Things like our green home renovation tax credit is estimated to reduce at least 9 megatons a year. That puts more money in the pockets of Canadians while at the same time helping them lower their energy bills. But at the end of the day, it's about having fewer molecules of CO2 in the air. So if we're kind of starting at that. That's our goal. That's our starting objective, and we do believe that by facilitating the adoption of carbon capture, capturing the exportation of clean Canadian technology, that we can achieve that. And if Canada is involved in helping to do that, then I absolutely do believe that it's incumbent upon the Canadian government to ensure that happens.
But do you see that over time that we must get out of the business of oil and gas, that if we're going to ever deal with climate change? I mean, at some point, do we not have to, as a major producer, have to get rid of it?
Well, every analyst indicates that consumption for oil and gas is going to go up significantly over at least the next 20 years. The modeling is all that consumption will be going up. So I would rather that those needs be met by Canadian energy, extracted out of the ground at the highest environmental technology standards, where the proceeds from the economic activity pay for roads, hospitals, schools here in Canada. The profits go into Canadian companies that pay into Canadian pension plans, and I would rather that happen than more oil consumed from countries like Saudi Arabia, Iran, Venezuela, and the United States even. The United States is our biggest trading partner, it's also our biggest competitor. And when you think of the fact that Justin Trudeau gave $4.5 billion to an American energy company to leave Canada, and that they took that money and invested in other energy projects that now compete with Canada, it's ridiculous. And when you go to Alberta and you talk to people in Saskatchewan as well, and you meet people who are working for small and medium-sized businesses doing work in the energy sector, and they've not only have their companies gone bankrupt, but their equipment has been auctioned off to American companies, and they see the rigs being pulled across the border to put people to work in the United States. It's not just heartbreaking, it's devastating. And we want to get our energy sector back on its feet, export more Canadian energy to displace foreign energy and foreign oil that is coming from regimes with terrible human rights records that don't have the same environmental standards we do.
My brother lives in Essex.
Sure. I'm interested in knowing why not a national carbon tax? I mean, many scientists and economists say that it's the best, simplest way to reduce carbon emissions. And one of our scientists that works here, economist that works here at BC, has done some analysis and said, in actual fact, he thinks that your plan is going to increase emissions. And and by doing so, by not having a national carbon tax, like in provinces like BC or Quebec, then we're sort of offside with the rest of the country. Why not a national carbon?
Well, I disagree. You know, you can look at the fact that the federal government is, with its carbon tax, is falling further behind from its targets. I know that there are many companies that would support a carbon tax because they can just pass it on to consumers, and it's just becomes a cost of doing business. But for Canadians who are going to have to pay more for their home heating, more for getting to and from work, more for groceries, anything that has to be transported, I'm not interested in making life more expensive. That is ultimately the choice. You know, it's quite clear where the parties stand. This is going to be a very clear choice for Canadians. An ever-increasing carbon tax. We know that the Liberal carbon tax will have to be increased dramatically. They are refusing to come clean with how high they are going to raise that, and so that is a choice for Canadians. An ever-increasing carbon tax under the Liberal government, scrapping the carbon tax with our government, a Conservative Party that will be lowering taxes, a Liberal government which will be raising taxes. Ultimately, Canadians will make their decision in 9 days.
I find it ironic, though, the carbon tax was brought in by a fiscally conservative government here in British Columbia under Gordon Campbell. One of his senior cabinet ministers, Kevin Falcon, is now your advisor, should you be elected, in dealing with corporate largesse. And he supports the carbon tax in BC, and it's been shown to have reduced carbon output in BC on a per capita basis. So you do seem to be out of step in that regard.
No, I disagree. When you look at other countries that have abandoned their carbon taxes because it has not helped in reaching targets, and it has made the cost of living too expensive for citizens of those countries. Here in BC, for the last year, the emissions actually went up. And look, our system will allow for provinces to make their own decisions. We will recognize that provincial governments may feel that in their jurisdiction they want to go one way or another. But what we're saying is we're not going to impose a carbon tax. We're going to scrap the federal carbon tax and allow provinces to adjust to the realities of their own economy and their own population. At the same time as we're making life more affordable with things like the Green Home Renovation Tax Credit, and we can reduce far more emissions if we help. For example, in China, with 3,000 coal-powered electrical plants, if just 100 of them adopted the the carbon capture technology that was perfected in Saskatchewan, we can reduce hundreds of megatons worth of CO2 emissions every year. That's what we're focused on, not making the cost of gas go up, even more than it already has.
How is your innovation fund not, or post-innovation fund not a form of a carbon tax?
Quite simply because it does not flow to government. That is not being collected by government, does not go to fund government activity. And there's flexibilities within which the companies can decide the model that best suits them, how they invest in that research and technology. So it's maximum flexibility with a very singular focus on reducing emissions and technology that helps do that without going into government revenues.
Your platform talks about using every tool at our disposal to move forward with projects that are in national interest. An example, or some of the tools that haven't been used so far that you would invoke?
Well, we know that with things like the Northern Gateway pipeline project, the Liberal government didn't even try to get the consultations done properly after an initial court finding. They basically vetoed that. We're talking about creating a national energy corridor that really can address the regulatory issues up front. What we know from talking to project proponents, the reason why tens of billions of dollars of investment have left Canada and the energy sector specifically is because companies are no longer interested in spending the hundreds of millions of dollars required for consultations, environmental assessments, and things like that, only to have the goalposts move back and forth or side to side. And what we're saying is, okay, let's establish a geographic space where the government can take a leadership role in addressing Indigenous consultations in a dynamic way, determining the most environmentally sensible route for something like a pipeline or for sharing hydroelectricity, and then present that space, and then the private sector will pay for the actual construction of that. There'll be set parameters around the regulatory hurdles that project proponents will have to make.
Mr. Scheer, one of the problems that the Harper government had, the Trudeau government had, is that under the Constitution, the consultation with Indigenous people, nobody knows exactly what that looks like. You're saying that that there are First Nations that agree with building a pipeline. but there are a lot that don't. How do you get past that? How do you have certainty for companies, but how do you also consult without saying to Indians, oh, well, or the First Nations people, we're gonna listen, but we're still gonna build the pipeline?
Well, that is a great question, and it really does speak to some of the uncertainty that has developed in the last few years of exactly what the threshold is. There actually have been some very instructive Supreme Court rulings that have given a fairly comprehensive roadmap for what proper consultations should mean. And I believe it can best be summed up to saying where there are concerns that can be addressed, they must be addressed. But it does not say that just being opposed is enough to block or cancel a project. So if there are, for example, Indigenous concerns that relate to treaty claims or traditional grounds that are very meaningful to First Nations community, and that meets the threshold of something that a proponent would have to address by either changing a route or some type of partnership agreement to ensure that the land claim is not affected, that they must do it. But there's never been a suggestion in this country that anybody gets a veto just because they're against it.
But as you know, in British Columbia, we don't have treaties.
Mm-hmm.
And so all of these overlapping claims, how would your government push through these overlapping, push through a pipeline with overlapping claims without settling those claims?
Mm-hmm. Well, I believe that's where the energy corridor work really helps up front, because it does allow the government to establish a geographic space, then go to the First Nations communities that will be affected by that and say, okay, this is what we're proposing. Now we can start to negotiate what that would mean. And if you know that this strip of land going across here, or perhaps in different locations, now that and you know what we're envisaging telecommunications, hydroelectricity, pipelines. Now we can start to negotiate, and we can do that once and for all up front, and then for years have the benefit of knowing, okay, if we ever want to increase our capacity to export our oil and gas, there's where we put it, because that's been addressed and the government has done all of that on the front end.
And what about Quebec?
Well, I am very optimistic. I am very confident. I know that Monsieur Legault is very interested in sharing his hydroelectricity, his province's hydroelectricity. I know from growing up in Ontario and having lots of friends and family in Ontario, the mess that the Liberal government provincially made with the hydro situation there, and the cost of hydro going through the roof over a very short period of time. And I'm very optimistic that by creating these types of win-win opportunities, that all provinces would get behind it. Quebecers don't want to buy foreign oil. They don't want to send their consumer dollars to the United States. And depending on the year, around half of the gasoline that motorists are putting in their cars come from the United States, Venezuela, countries like that. We know that there are thousands of jobs in Quebec in the energy sector, and that many manufacturing jobs are dependent on a vibrant energy sector as well. So I believe that we can create the winning conditions on this.
But back to and just for a minute back to so with the Indigenous claims, is it? I mean, this corridor. When people think of corridor, they think of straight. It could be quite zigzaggy. Is that what you would? Is that possible?
Well, I mean, when you look at any pipeline, there are always movements within. It's never just a straight line, because
even TMX, they've zigged and zagged.
Right. Even when they were building them 30 years ago, if there's a concern around an aquifer or a more secure place to cross or go a river or things like that, they're never just a straight line between 2 points. And so I don't want to prejudge too much of the outcome, because this really is, we're starting this off with a real spirit of goodwill and good faith. We know that there are dozens and dozens of Indigenous communities that want these projects to be built because they will benefit from them. They've signed partnership agreements. The number one employer for Indigenous people in this country is the mining sector, and the number one company the single largest company that has hired Indigenous Canadians is an energy company. So when we're talking about First Nations that live in rural and remote locations, it's forestry, mining, and energy that are going to create the jobs for First Nations people to have the same possibilities of the same quality of life that we all enjoy. That's essential. So this is really not about ramming something through or forcing something through, but a spirit of cooperation to get to the point where everybody benefits. And I am confident that as they have with TMX and Northern Gateway, that First Nations communities will be very supportive of this.
Think you can do it in 4 years?
I believe so, yes, absolutely. And we also have a short-term plan for things like TMX, which includes a number of things I can go into, but I know we have a...
When you talk about, national or energy corridors, I mean, when I think about various projects, when you talk about the 2 different oil pipelines or so, at one point there was a half a dozen plus LNG projects, different routes, and there's electrical transmission lines, 3 or 4 of them projects in the books right now. Are you talking about multiple energy corridors, and like how would that work? I mean, there's just not a energy corridor, and so this process you're talking about where you sort of front load it, and the government would become involved in sort of establishing the parameters and figuring out what the route would look like. Are you talking about doing that for all of these projects?
Well, initially this is about undoing the backlog, the obstacles and the roadblocks for large projects. We know where the ports are, and we know where the natural resources are, so that gives us an idea of a general sense. But when you start thinking about multiple projects like LNG in many different provinces, a lot of those are proceeding anyway without the same types of difficulty that oil and gas pipelines are facing. So our priority right now is to be able to get the large projects that will allow us to export more of our oil to other countries. That's our priority, and those are on the energy side, and then as well on the hydroelectrical side, knowing that there are huge reserves of extra capacity in Quebec, with the potential to share that into other provinces like Ontario. Those are the initial guiding kind of navigation points that we're looking at on the front end.
So what would be an example of that? Are you talking about reopening Northern Gateway and then establishing a corridor for them? Or?
Well, when you look at Northern Gateway, that was access to a deep water port that opened up Asian markets. TMX is while important, is not in anywhere near the same type of benefits that Northern Gateway would have provided. When we talk about getting off the American discount and ending the practice of just selling our energy at a discount rate to help fuel our biggest competitor, that was Northern Gateway. When you look at the vessels required at the end at the TMX terminal versus what could have been done in a deep water port, that gave us tremendous advantages. So that is something that we want to bring back. We also will recognize that the shipping ban that the Liberals have imposed is just kneecapping Canadian shipping and Canadian energy. Those are also the things we're going to be looking at.
So how would that work exactly if the federal government is going to front load some kind of energy corridor that would make Northern Gateway happen? So what would that look like?
Well, it would look like going back, so respecting the court ruling, going back, redoing the consultations in a dynamic way, and then ensuring that when a private sector proponent comes through and says, okay, we're willing to invest the billions of dollars required to get this built, that government doesn't have to do it because the consultations have been done properly with a ministerial representative. Or one of the things we're calling for is for a minister to be responsible specifically for these types of things, and that rather than just sending a department representative, that we have a high-ranking member in the minister's office do a dynamic consultation up front.
Sorry, Mr. Scheer, are you saying that you would restart the gateway process?
So,
Or you're just interested in the idea?
well, I want to get back to the point in time in the not too distant past where government didn't have to build these things, where the private sector did. And right now, there are no projects being proposed because there's no confidence in our sector. I believe with a new Conservative government, we could restore that confidence, getting the consultations done right, and then inviting the private sector to say, okay, now that this is addressed, now that we have a government that is willing to take these things seriously and champion the development and expansion of our natural resource sector here in Canada, do what you've always done, invest in Canada, create jobs and opportunity.
So you create that confidence overnight, though? I mean, even in 4 years?
I really do believe the Canadians are behind it, and yes, I do believe. I mean, we can see in Alberta just with the difference in the provincial government has made, getting rid of the NDP provincially, who specifically, is ideologically opposed to developing our resource sector. We've seen confidence return there. I absolutely do believe, it'll take time because the damage that has been done is systemic. I mean, what a terrible indictment of a country's economic and energy policy when a government had to buy out, nationalize a pipeline. I mean, only under Justin Trudeau would that have to happen. Every other country around the world, people are fighting to, put their dollars in to develop and expand the energy sector. And in Canada, under Trudeau, we had to buy it with our tax dollars, and we still can't seem to get it built.
And then you
But
build it and sell it?
I would like to sell TMX as soon as possible, as soon as there's a buyer that would be interested in buying it and making Canadian taxpayers whole. It's unbelievable to me. I mean, we knew Justin Trudeau was not a good negotiator when we, it's no wonder that he came back with the NAFTA deal that he did. He sat down with oil executives from Kinder Morgan, overpaid for a decades-old pipeline without any plan to get it built, and they took that money and are now competing with us. It's just unbelievable.
Can I ask you to switch topics completely? I have quite a specific question about your platform as it addresses addictions and so on. You have offered, you're promising more money for treatment. Would you consider making treatment for addictions part of the healthcare plan under the health?
That is the focal point that we're working. Let me put it this way: that is something that we believe in. We understand that recovery programs are the best way to get people off of addictive drugs. And what we're saying in this platform is to start the groundwork to refocus some of the attention, rather than just maintaining addictions and maintaining people in a lifetime of unimaginable hardship and terribly dangerous behavior, breaking that cycle and focusing on recovery. That will take time, and it will take lots of resources. What we're talking about is very in-depth types of programs and services.
But in the long term, you would like to see
I would-
addictions treatment, full addictions treatment be part of the
I would like to see.
universal healthcare.
I would like to see our healthcare system put an increasing focus on recovery and building up capacity for recovery programs.
Part of
Yes.
the reason you have addicts is because they're middle-class people who have to get rock bottom before someone will pay for them to go to treatment because they can't afford treatment. Under your government, will middle-class people be able to afford treatment before they become homeless?
What we're saying is that is the capacity that we want to start building now, increasing the capacity over time to precisely avoid the prospect of people having to lose everything in their lives before they're able to start to get well again. And this will take cooperation, it'll take a lot of resources, it'll take provincial government buy-in, but we believe that with this platform announcement that we've made, we can start that work.
And that's costed in?
No, it isn't.
Well,
I was gonna say, there's no dollar attached to it, so how
on the
seriously
recovery,
can anybody take
on the
it?
recovery, on the pilot project, on the initial investments that we're talking about at the federal level, it is costed on what we're willing to put in, and what we're talking about is developing the types of expertise and the types of direction that will shift the focus from right now, where it's basically just maintain addictions and have a greater focus on
I
recovery.
didn't see a dollar value, sorry, in the platform. So what is it? What are you looking at?
On the recovery
spending
model?
on recoveries and recovery?
On the recovery model, we can get that specifically for you, but it was mentioned in the
But
platform.
it's a pilot, so it's not an actual.
Right. If you're talking about where we end up,
Right.
of course, we have to start with where we are at today. We're not going to do what the Liberals are doing with pharmacare and just make multi-billion-dollar announcements without any plan to develop it. What we're saying is that from a federal government perspective, we're going to start the process for capacity building, best practices, information sharing on how recovery models can be enhanced across Canada.
You have had, all of the parties have had, if I can call them category directions. And one of the things that, in looking at the category directions, one of the things that struck me is that the party membership is open to people who are permanent residents and not and they don't have to be citizens, and that's true of all of the parties. I'm wondering whether you think that that is part of the reason that so many candidates in this election seem to have not, if that's played into why we've had so many candidates that seem to not fit with necessarily the views of the party even.
On allowing members to be permanent residents, but not.
Yeah.
Oh.
And because we've certainly seen within the Chinese community and within and I'm particularly concerned because mainland Chinese people tend to be permanent residents and not become citizens, and I'm concerned that if we allow mainland Chinese to have so much influence in parties, they can choose the nominations for candidates, party policy, help choose the leader, and they're not citizens. Does that not concern you?
Mm-hmm. Well, I believe that, first of all, I don't know that it has any correlation to all the parties having some issues with candidates. I mean, when we look at the types of candidates in other parties that have had to make apologies or in some cases be dropped as candidates, there are a wide variety of reasons, and I don't think you can trace any one common theme.
But do you think you should be a citizen to be a member of the party?
Well, that's something that would, our membership decides what the rules are for holding memberships. We have these conventions, as you know. I believe the other parties have it open to permanent residents as
all
well.
of the
Yeah,
parties do.
yeah.
I just think it's concerning that you don't have to be a citizen, and you can actually have more influence on who the government is than I can by not being a party.
Mm-hmm. Well, that
You're
is.
gonna join the party.
Yeah, join the party and pick your candidates. Look, I mean, we are always looking at how foreign governments influence our elections. This election, probably more than any other one, there has been excellent communication between government security agencies and political parties, and that is something I say in a very nonpartisan way. This is something that the current government implemented to do that in this election, so we can be made aware of external threats or suspected activity by foreign governments. I believe that is the issue, ensuring that foreign governments are not trying to have any kind of influence in our elections. I think that should be where the focal point is, maybe less on the individuals, the permanent residents here in Canada, and more on what the activities of the foreign government is doing. And so when we see activity, whether it's people who have diplomatic status here in Canada trying to convey messages or trying to affect the outcome of an election, that's where the government should rightly be focusing on.
Have you read Jonathan Manthorpe's book, The Claws of the Panda?
I have not. I should. Okay. Thank you.
Because
Add that to my reading.
individuals have a significant effect, not just government.
Mhm.
And even scarier is Silent Invasion about what happened in Australia.
Mm-hmm. So I have heard from some of our counterparts in Australia who have spoke about this phenomenon. And this is the price of having a very open and democratic system where people enjoy the levels of freedom that we've all fought for. But I do believe that we have to start taking this more seriously. I am pleased at the level of communication cooperation, as I mentioned, of our security officials, bringing political parties into conversations so that we can be made aware of this. And when you look at some of the types of examples of things that have happened in other countries, I think this is something that all levels of government and all political parties are going to have to think about in the coming future.
Can we talk about housing affordability?
Sure.
Which is a big issue here, as you know. And your platform talks about the Build More Homes competition that will reward municipalities that reduce red tape. What does that mean? Reward how?
Well, by perhaps what we're envisaging is pools of funds that would be made available to municipalities that could show, with metrics, a marked improvement for development times and regulatory reduction in regulatory barriers. So we know that part of the problem for the increase in housing prices is a lack of supply. And when you have more and more dollars chasing basically static levels of housing units, you're going to see those price increases go up. So we're the only party that's talking about a supply side solution to that, a number of different ways, tying infrastructure dollars to opening up new areas for development, but also where we can do an evaluation, say, as the C.D. Howe Institute did, over $100,000 worth of a home price is made up of development delays and regulatory burdens. Municipalities that can show marked improvement would have access to extra resources for the types of priorities that they would need in their communities.
To build housing?
To allow the private sector to build houses quicker and more affordably by lowering the regulatory burden and the delays that often
But
accompany
what
with
do you
it.
bring to the table in that?
We-
If they lower the barriers, how do you reward them? What do they use the money for?
Well, they can use the money for municipal priorities. They can do it for things. They would then have that available to them.
So the fund in itself would not build more housing. You're relying on the private sector to do that.
Yes, the fund would be there for it's an incentive for municipalities to basically streamline their processes, and this is something often lower levels of government go to the federal government with their wish list, and they lobby the federal government for any number of things, and that's fine, and I want to be a partner with municipalities and with provinces to address areas that are of their concern. But I will also have my wish list, and I will also want to see some improvement, because it's very easy for lower levels of government to point the finger at the feds and say, well, the federal government should do more, the federal government should do more. But when we do an analysis and we look at municipalities and we look at bureaucratic processes, when we look at, because of jurisdictional issues, getting a building permit in one area just a few kilometers away, needing a whole different, going through the whole different process to build the exact same home, but because of a jurisdictional issue or whatnot, going through an entire process, adding to those delays. So what we're going to say to provinces and municipalities is, let's tackle this together. There are many things you can do to get new units on the market faster, and with lower regulatory regimes that will lower prices for Canadians, and we'll work with this cooperatively, but we will expect their participation. The same way with provinces, premiers who come to the table asking for more and more from the federal government. I will want to see improvements on interprovincial trade and tearing down trade barriers between provinces, so we can come at this cooperatively, but we want to see real action, because at the end of the day, it's Canadian consumers and it's Canadian taxpayers who have to pay for everything. So let's recognize that.
So as you say, there's a supply problem. So how does removing the stress test for mortgages address the supply problem? Isn't that really just going to push up the price of, many economists say, that'll just push up the price of a limited supply. It's not like it's going to make housing more affordable for those people.
Well, it will make maintaining a home more affordable for some people, and you are right that is not part of the supply side, that is part of the demand side, but we are obviously going to have a balanced approach on that as well, with the stress test and with 30-year mortgages for first-time home buyers. The stress test has had the unintended consequence for many couples who should be able to qualify who no longer can. It also has a very, very peculiar impact by forcing people who are going through renewals to stay with their existing lender. When a mortgage comes up for renewal, if a mortgage holder, if a homeowner stays with their original bank, they don't have to go through the stress test. If they want to switch and get a more competitive rate, they do. So often we've heard many, many stories of people who do not get the best possible rate because there's no incentive for their existing lender to give them a good rate because they know they can't leave. That's having a very negative effect. It's also pushing people out of the regulated mortgage market into private lenders, which often pay much higher interest, charge much higher interest rates. So it is having that effect. That's not good for the economy. It's certainly not good for consumers. It's increasing debt levels at higher borrowing costs. So we believe that reworking the stress test and addressing the supply side issues will achieve what we're looking for.
So here you mentioned on this pooled funding for for the municipalities if they reduce and regulatory burden. Is there any stipulation that in order to access that funding, like the type of housing that the cities have to build? Because one of the things that's happened in Vancouver is that there's a lot of luxury, condos being built, which doesn't really exactly help. You know, and
Yeah.
oftentimes, I mean, it just happens that they're sold to people offshore, you know, people with a lot of money. And so there's this feeling that we're not building the right kind of housing, which would might be townhouses that are a little bit lesser value, whatever. Is there any stipulation about that?
Of course, yeah. No, this and this will be, you know, the work that we do when we're in government. This is about making homes more affordable for Canadians, for, you know, young working couples, people who are starting out. This will all be designed around the types of housing that our market is lacking. We certainly won't be incentivizing municipalities to make it easier for the very wealthy to buy the types of homes that they'd like to. That will happen anyway, and it doesn't need government help to do that. Where the government attention does need to be in is for precisely the people who are just priced out of the market. When I think of, you know, the house my parents bought when they raised me, the house that my aunts and uncles bought, for a young couple in Mississauga or here in the Greater Vancouver region, when you're looking at like $900,000 million just to get into a starter home, I talked to a lot of people about 10 years younger than me, you know, mid to late 20s, and they are starting to believe that they will never have that type of home. They'll never have a 3-bedroom, you know, single or double attached garage where they can, the types of homes that they were brought up in. And so there's a lot of anxiety there, and it means that they're contemplating delaying starting families or having smaller families. So that's precisely the types of focus, that is precisely the focal point that this initiative will be centered on.
Mr. Scheer, this is an awkward question to ask, but anyway, I'm going to ask it. You seem like a nice guy. But your campaign hasn't always, you haven't always seemed like a nice guy, if I can put it that way. There are photos of you making announcements, standing all by yourself. We don't see very many photos of you wading into crowds. And your attack on the English language debate at the very opening to call Mr. Trudeau a phony and a fake who doesn't deserve it. What? Are you running against type? I mean, you seem like a nice guy. You were positioned as a nice guy before the campaign started, but you seem kind of mean.
Well, when you look at our announcements, we have a wide variety of different types of message events when we're communicating a message. I had lots of candidates behind me yesterday when we launched the platform. I had dozens of energy sector workers in Edmonton. And if you look at our events, the events we do, I always stay afterwards and take pictures and meet people. I think last night we gave out 500 ball caps that we were signing. We had over 1,200 people last night. We are staying focused on our positive message. The interaction at the debate really was the culmination of weeks and weeks of Justin Trudeau evading answers on questions that he should be able to answer, lying about his role in the SNC-Lavalin affair, lying about his role in firing the Attorney General and the reasons for that, his inability to just answer simple questions, and you know, skipping out on 2 debates. There was a lot of frustration that he was not being accountable for his actions. And I think I believe it's a fair comment. It's a fair comment to believe that he has misrepresented himself as someone who cares about these issues.
Do you think for Canadians who don't know you, somebody suggested to me that the decision, the strategy for you to do that was to appeal to your base as opposed to appeal to other Canadians. And you complimented Mr. Singh during that debate for his graciousness, for being against attacks. So has that hurt you personally? Because you do trail your party in popularity. So do you think that was a mistake?
No, not at all. I believe it was necessary to drive home the point that when you have someone who cannot tell the truth, who has told outright lies, who has misrepresented himself on so many different ways, that this is someone who does not deserve to run this country. Now, ultimately, it will be up to Canadians to make that decision. I'm one vote, and I'm certainly trying to convince Canadians that he does not deserve a second term. It is with them now. But I think it's important to highlight Justin Trudeau is a master of hiding his faults in plain sight, and he pretends to be the opposite of what he actually is. And so to call that out, I think it was necessary to call that out.
Who are you? Are you the nice guy we see coming in here? Or,
Absolutely. You know,
or
it's funny because it's funny because you said, you know, is this appeal to the base? No, this is a message for Canadians who are undecided to consider the choice. I'm often told I smile too much, that I'm too nice, and I believe that I am passionate and forceful, but I am also a very nice guy. I believe that comes through. But really, this is about a choice between someone who I believe has lost the moral authority to government, someone who has interfered in a criminal court case. Like, sometimes it's, to kind of bring it back to what we're talking about here, we have in this country clear walls between different branches of government to ensure that every Canadian is treated equally, that we are all equal under the law, and that no one person can abuse the power of their office. And here we have a Prime Minister who broke through that wall, who interfered in a criminal court case, and then fired his Attorney General when he didn't get the answer that he wanted, and then lied about it to Canadians. And my message to Canadians who are undecided, who say, well, if you're looking at who you can trust for the next 4 years, it's not this guy. It's not someone who has broken promises, failed to come clean on his role and things. As we talk about issues, when Justin Trudeau says things like, when he's making his promises, it's important that people remember the promises he's broken in the past and the fact that he is not trustworthy with other things. So that is part of ensuring that when Canadians are looking at platforms and comparing announcements, that they understand that with Justin Trudeau, it's not as advertised. You will not get what you were promised.
But the fact that you're still just neck and neck with them.
I really don't look at polls. The feedback we're getting is very positive. Our candidates are, as I said, reported record numbers of volunteers. We're having, in some ridings, 2 or 3 times more volunteers we did last election. The feedback at the doors is amazing. Ultimately, we have 9 days. We'll find out in 9 days.
So you talk about the hypocrisy of Justin Trudeau. Let me ask you, the Conservatives were well aware of the Heather Leung video, well before she won the nomination. And yet the party allowed the nomination to stand, you allowed it to stand, and she was only dismissed as a candidate when that offensive video made headlines. That looks like hypocrisy.
No, I disagree. I was not aware of that video until it was brought to my attention.
Half of the riding executive resigned when she became a candidate. They went to the party and said she shouldn't be the candidate.
Well, look, all I can tell you is that we do our very best. We do a robust vetting process, and when things are brought certainly to my attention, we expect candidates to own up for things that they've done in the past.
When did you learn about that video then?
Me personally, it was right around the same day that we dismissed her as the candidate.
How do you feel that she's still using Conservative Party advertising or?
Well, my understanding is that she's no longer using our literature. We expect that she would follow our rules and the rules of Elections Canada, and I can assure you that we're in no way, we don't expect that she would in any way try to represent herself as a Conservative candidate now that we've made that decision very clear. But I have to point out, if we're talking about hypocrisy, we have a Prime Minister who has kept a candidate in Nova Scotia who has made all kinds of horrendous, misogynistic, racist comments. Justin Trudeau working closely with with a candidate in Montreal who had made anti-Semitic comments, agreeing on a strategy to keep those hidden, and that if they were to come out during the campaign, agreeing on a strategy how to manage it, and only dismissing that candidate when it came to light. We certainly have no lessons to learn from Justin Trudeau on handling candidates even with his own background. I won't even go into his own background and whether or not he would pass the Liberal Party vetting process. He certainly wouldn't pass the Conservative vetting process.
Do you have concerns about the vetting process, though, that these candidates are slipping through?
I think Canadians understand that political parties do everything we can. We have the resources we have, and we do our very best to check through and to look for things that would in any way communicate, send a negative signal to Canadians, and that when things are brought to our attention, we deal with them.
Well, our time is about up.
Great.
We thank you for joining us for this hour.
Thanks very much.